Please, no. Not my children. Oh, please, please, no. Anything. I'll do anything. Please. Please. Not the baby. Please. Oh, my God. I am Rebecca. I was born a slave, sold as a slave, and bred as a slave, right here in the United States of America. When I was a child, there were hundreds of children like me. Today, there are thousands. This clip from Salt Lake City's KTMW TV with Doris Hanson will give you a glimpse into my not so unusual life. I am one of 39 children born to my father's 6 wives. We were regimentally trained from the moment of our birth in blind obedience and complete dedicated servitude. My mother, like other polygamist women, was in bondage to fear, control, and the blind obedience to a bloodthirsty and angry God that we were taught to believe in. I grew up in extreme poverty. The psychological and emotional needs of women, any needs, physically, emotionally, financially, intellectually, educationally, were considered weaknesses to overcome, and I do mean even the use of their brain. It was not allowed. My father always had the first word, the last word, and all those in between. When I was a little girl, when my father was in prison, his youngest wife, Rachel, escaped with her 5 children. She died shortly after in an airplane crash. The state of Utah let my father out of prison and gave him back those 5 children that she had escaped with on his promise that he would never live polygamy. Of course, he took 2 more wives after that. And those children were raised to believe what he taught us all. And he would say, the finger of God struck that airplane out of the sky and killed Rachel because she broke her covenants to me. And he did it so I wouldn't have to.
My goodness.
We were raised continually on the blood covenants, that if we did not live plural marriage, we would suffer eternal damnation, and the only way that we could be saved was by blood atonement, our blood. Jesus Christ didn't die for our sins. We had to die for our own. And the worst sin you could commit was not believing in polygamy after it had been told to you. After it had been told to you, you were worse than somebody that never heard it. You were totally going to be damned forever. And this is how I was raised.
I was raised in a Kingston group, and we were taught exactly the same thing. That's right.
When my father was in prison, after he came out, he put my mother on a shelf, so to speak, and she was separated from him for a long time. She knew that if she married a man that didn't believe in polygamy, she was going to hell. So she converted a guy. When I was 11 years old, my life began to change from bad to worse. We were taught that if we did not protect our virginity with our life, we would suffer eternal damnation. We were no good. We would be good for nothing but servants. At 11 years old, my stepfather beat me violently. He drugged me by the hair of my head till he pulled handfuls of my hair out. He hit me so hard, he knocked out part of this eyebrow, which is missing. There's scars on my face. There are scars on my body I've had all my life. He tied me to an old iron bed. My one leg is slightly longer than the other. My spine is twisted and made me a little crippled for years. But I survived that rape. I survived, and that was my sin. I was sitting in pool of blood when Mother came home, but she couldn't look at me. I know now, looking back, that she was in a state of shock. And she was shaking, and she started reading the blood atonements. She was reading them over and over and crying, and so, of course, I waited for my death. I believed with all my heart they were coming to kill me, and I had to die. no medical care, and I should have had medical care, but I never did.
Yeah.
Confined to the house, waiting for them to come and kill me.
Because
I survived.
Because you survived the rape.
That's right, because I survived. And I was supposed to protect my virginity with my life, and I lived, so I was no good. And so I began to pray. And I asked God, well, I look at it now, and I think I spoke to God like a young attorney. But I said, God, you gave me life. If you want to take it, it's okay with me. But there's only one thing I ask. Give me wisdom. Why would I have to die for a crime committed on me? If you're a just God, why? Even at 11 years old, somehow in that moment I knew no just God would ask that. So I told God, if you choose to let me live, give me wisdom. And I promise, if you open the door, I'll walk through it. And I've done that. I'm here.
Yeah, here it is. And this is typical in the other polygamy groups. You would be punished for a crime committed against you, and yet the man who did it to you was fine.
He was held unaccountable, totally unaccountable.
Absolutely unaccountable.
When I was approximately 15 years old, I was married. I say approximately because all of the birth certificates of my mother's children were forged. It does not matter whether you are wife number 1 or wife number 101. You are still property. It is a misconception that if you're the first wife, your life is going to be nice. I was the first wife. And I was told before I got married, now listen, you have to live polygamy. It's a covenant you must do for your salvation. If you don't, you will suffer eternal damnation.
Right.
And if you turn away from the gospel, now that it's been told to you,
you're even worse off than
you're worse than you ever could possibly be, and the only way you can be saved is by blood atonement. Your blood can be shed to save your soul. And of course, we love you and we do want to save your soul. But you have your free agency. You may choose.
Define free agency.
My free agency was like holding a gun to my head and saying, hey, you can do what I say or I'll pull the trigger. Your choice. You choose which one you want. That was my free agency. There is no free agency. He was extremely abusive. If he wanted to make me sad, it was threaten the baby. And that's not freedom of choice. There is no freedom of choice in fundamentalist religious polygamy. That applies to all fundamentalist religious polygamy, Muslim and otherwise. It does. Because when they believe that they are self-appointed gods and the rules they make don't apply to them.
That's right.
It is not religion. It's a symptom of full-blown narcissism. These are the famous and infamous polygamists in my life. In 1945, these polygamist men were released from Utah State Penitentiary. They said they were there for religious persecution, but the police report said something quite differently. This man is my father, Morris Coons. This man is Dr. Reuben Clark Allred, the head of the Apostolic United Brethren, known as the AUB, or the Allred Group. He is also my uncle. This man is Joseph Lyman Jessup, another one of my uncles. I think I'm related to every Jessup in every polygamist group that there is. This is Heber Kimbel Cleveland. He was my father-in-law. And this is David Darger. Same family as Joe Darger, who wrote the book Love Times 3. At that time, there were 183 sex crime charges against polygamous men, unlawful cohabitation, the Mann Act, and 4 pages of child brides on public record. There was no religious persecution. Jeff's here with his child brides. Rula Jeff performed my marriage when I was a child bride. Child brides are a very important part of polygamy. Government funds are the backbone of polygamy, creating wealthy leaders and thousands of illegitimate children. All of these wives of Warren's are illegitimate wives, and they will have illegitimate children. This is Warren before they caught him and put him in prison. But Warren is just one of many. If the men had to be responsible for the children they spawned, financially responsible, polygamy would quickly shrink. Our religion taught us that we must live polygamy or suffer grave consequences. It taught us that we must have a child every year or as often as possible to expand God's kingdom. Of course, this expanded government funds, child labor, the workforce, the tithing. The more people, the greater the money. We were taught that we must be obedient to make our husbands gods in eternity, where they would people their own planet with their own seed. But in reality, we made religious crime lords, financed by your tax dollars, hiding their assets in corporations, ranches, and other untouchable entities, where no woman with a paternity suit could ever reach. Winston Blackmore, $4.3 million behind in his personal taxes, 9 child brides, and so many wives he can't remember their names. What does he do? He's the leader of a polygamist group in Canada. Child smuggling? Well, that's been going on all of our lives. Fathers own their children, and they will do with them what they wish. In 1953, Life magazine featured Clyde Mackert. He was polygamy's poster boy with 3 age-appropriate wives. 2 of those wives were my sisters. Clyde was touted to be so wonderful, yet today, several of his children have gone forward and testified that he sexually molested them. Dr. Reuben Clark Allred and Owen Allred, both leaders of the AUB, were my uncles. Dr. Reuben Clark Allred was murdered in May of 1977. He was one of about 30 people that were murdered by rival cult leader Ervil LeBaron. Yes, I have family in that group too. 2 of my sisters and 1 of my cousins were married to Ervil LeBaron's brother. The TV show Sister Wives with Cody Brown is a good example of a non-reality show. Cody and I share a maternal grandfather. We're both products of being raised in the AUB, Apostolic United Brethren. And Cody's wife, Christine, is my cousin. We were all raised on the same FLDS doctrine, including blood atonement. Cody's wives admit that polygamy is their faith. For his wives, consider the alternatives their faith offers them before you judge them. This is Joe Darger. He wrote the book Love Times 3. His twin wives, Vicki and Valerie, are my nieces. Joe Darger is from Dave Darger's family. Darger also has relatives down in Colorado City, Hilldale, FLDS country. David Darger is the secretary and treasurer of the fire department, but is also the city manager. It was David Brigham Darger who had such great influence on Brady Williams, who has the My 5 Wives show on television on the Learning Channel. Tom Green was another famous TV polygamist. Here's a picture of him with 5 child brides. 3 of them are his stepdaughters. The youngest one, Linda Coons, was my niece. According to the police report, Tom was cohabiting with her when she was 12 years old. When I asked my brother John why he didn't protect her, he said, "You have no idea how much trouble that would cause me with the brethren. Don't even ask." The Christian group gets in the news primarily because of their violent beating of their children, their incestuous marriages, and the extreme wealth of the men and the extreme poverty of the women. Rolling Stone magazine calls them America's most twisted crime family. 3 different churches by 3 of the LeBaron brothers, Joel, Ross, and Ervil. Ervil had his brother Joel murdered in order to take over his church. And of course, he is the one that had Rulon Clark Allred murdered, my uncle of the AUB. Left a trail of bodies from Mexico through California, Nevada, Utah, and Texas. Before making this film, I decided to sneak back in to Warren Jeff's country. We are driving down the road to Short Creek, Arizona. Warren Jeff's country, Colorado City and Hilldale. I have many relatives in this part of the country, sisters, cousins. I must be related to at least half the town. Today I'm sneaking back in with 3 other women that have escaped polygamy. The danger here in Short Creek is the police department, which creates more human rights violations than other criminals do. Because they are Warren's God Squad, they retaliate and brutalize, in the name of God, those who dare defy Warren. In Warren Jeff's community, when people call the state police to get help from the brutalization of the local God Squad, the state police will not interfere, claiming it's not their jurisdiction. These people are held captive in fear right here in the United States of America. They are too terrified to go on camera for fear of the retaliation. Polygamy is based on male privilege, sustained by fear and your tax dollars. Polygamy is more than a religion. It is a business. Follow the money trail and you'll see a blatant reality. The greatest support of polygamy is government funds. They have free child labor, tithing when money is made, and mass breeding pays tremendous amounts of money. Leaders of polygamous groups are wealthy. Women and children live lives of sacrifice, and men dedicate their homes and their lands, if they're true believers. Warren Jeffs had over $50,000 in cash in the car when he was arrested. His church alone was worth $110 million. The trust fund for the FLDS, $5.5 million. And that just scratches the surface. This is Willie Jessup's $3.6 million mansion that he got in the auction from Warren Jeffs. He's thinking about turning it into a big senior center. That's right, you guessed it. It will be all entirely government funded. They shut down the local store where people used to shop. They had everybody who was on food stamps take all their food to the warehouse where they decided who could and couldn't have it. So if there was any punishment, those people or families were starving because they'd given all their food stamps and food to the storage.
Because he wanted me as a workhorse, the breadwinner, so he wanted me for the sex machine. So I'd have to put up with his sexual abuse all the night long and then work all the day long. The second wife, she had children. The first wife was the one with the marriage certificate. What she'd say is, well, I'm going to claim that these children are mine, that I had them, was Zella. So she had this little baby, Kathleen, and the very day that she was born, this was told by the husband, I'm going to give this little baby to my first wife. She's going to record it as her baby and the birth certificate and everything else. And Zella just become irate. She's still laying there in the bed. She's still bleeding from having this baby out. And I'm watching all this, and she says, well, you can't steal my baby. The old sucker says, well, it's not your baby. It's my baby. She says, well, it's my baby too. He says, no more than if a man puts a quarter in a Coke machine and the Coke comes out. You can't say that Coke belongs to the machine, but it belongs to the man that put in a quarter. And she says, well, I'm going to go to the law then. And he came over and he grabbed the hair on her head and they shook it and he says, listen here to me. If you dare to go to the law, I will tell them that you're insane. They'll take one look at you with that screwy eye, which she always had an eye that would look off to the side, and they'll know that I'm telling the truth. They'll know that you're absolutely nuts, and they'll believe me, and they'll believe Francis. They're not going to believe you. And then the old sucker had his helper, which is this guy that was always sucking up to him, and he says, now, when this little girl gets to be 15 years old, you can take her for a wife. And Billy says, okay. Now, see, she had the mother there, which was held by the chain of, if you ever leave, I will keep your kid. So she's now a servant. She's got to stay there and be Francis' slave and take care of those children. But Francis could get welfare assistance for every child that she had. And then when she'd get all this government assistance, she would go off with Billy, and so Zella's left home taking care of the baby, changing the diaper. When the little girl was like 3 years old, and she come up, and she said something like wah wah or something like that to Zella, you know, who was standing by the sink, like I wanted a drink of water. And Francis said, that little girl just called you mother, didn't she? And Zella said, no, she didn't. She says, yes, she did. And she backhanded her right across the face and whop. She said, well, no, she didn't. She says, damn you, don't you lie to me. You don't ever have that little kid call you mother. So then she goes in and gets the big sucker. He comes in, and, well, he's walking 90 miles an hour. He was taking the belt right out of his pants, and he started whipping her, Zella, across the face. And she put up her arms to protect her face, and she had these big welts on her arms. And he says, put down your arms. And she says, no, you'll hit my face. And he says, put down your arms, damn you. And he just kept beating her. When it was all over with, Zella had these puffy eyes, and all she could see was these little slits, you know. She looked like a prize fighter. That's how badly she'd been beaten. And she had all these bruises all over her face and her arms.
Was Kathleen married to Billy?
Oh, yeah. 5 months after I got out of there, somebody came upstairs and said, I want you to know that Kathleen has just had a baby. I just felt bad, and I attended her funeral here about a month ago.
She was given to him, promised him on the day she was born. How old was she when
That is right. I think he started having sex with her when she was like 15 or 16. And nobody...
I'm on my way to St. George now to talk with Ed Casilia. He's an author and a newspaper man that moved to this area to study polygamy.
Kids were supposed to be in school. There were photographers through the harvesting period taking pictures of these kids working in the fields instead of being in school or instead of being homeschooled. They are put to work. The boys are put to work in the construction companies or in the various factories and things that they have out there in the Short Creek area, which range from companies that help to build local, state, and federal buildings to contracting with the Department of Defense, with the United States military. There is a manufacturing company out there that makes tools and parts for the U.S. military under government contract because they can outbid, because they have kids from 5 years old on up working at these sites, picking up the debris, working as a cleanup crew. There are kids out there who are framing houses at 10, 11, 12 years old. There are kids out there driving bulldozers and backhoes at 12 and 13 years old. That's how the businesses are run. They're church-owned. They can outbid everybody else because they don't pay the labor, and so they get all these contracts. But they outbid everybody because they have underage boys out there working. We went past the elementary school. It looked like nobody had stepped foot on those facilities for years. Through the various political and religious pressure that was placed upon the school district from Warren and his followers, that they had built some new schools that they had bought new desks, new books, new facilities, new everything. All government funded. They had an airplane that they bought for the Colorado City Board of Education, so that way the members of the board could fly from Colorado City to Flagstaff or Phoenix for state Board of Education meetings. All of that went out the window because the minute it all happened, Warren ordered homeschooling for every child. Education takes place in the home, supposedly. Never mind that the enforcement or the evaluation of the kids never really takes place, which is a fault of the Utah state government, who has consistently turned a blind eye to the crimes of polygamy and bigamy. So education is non-existent. The kids are placed full-time into the construction companies, the metal shop prefab companies, the fields to work in the agriculture that's out there. Nonetheless, taxpayer money goes to build the school. Taxpayer money goes to fund the teachers who were in the area, all of whom, by the way, were members of the church. So the kids get pulled out of school. There are no students to attend the school. Teachers are out of work. So guess what? Who starts collecting unemployment, additional welfare benefits? Because suddenly they don't have jobs because there aren't any kids in the school. A school that was built on land purchased from the FLDS church. And again, another source of profit for the profit. So it's this cycle of knowing how, as a newspaper guy, you're trained to follow the money. And there are so many money trails out there that it's unbelievable.
Breeding to become gods or mob bosses. The more children they spawn, the more new brides they have, and the more child labor, and the more tithing, and the more government funds. When breeding to collect government funds becomes a business, do you think these guys really care if those fertile women are related to them or not? The national money set aside to help out single mothers has become the same money which provides the reason and the purpose for enslaving them. Women fear speaking up when they know that the men have control of their children. Polygamous inbreeding causes deformities. These religions that condone the murders of non-believers are spreading. Polygamists in America are now 2/3 Islamic, the rest are Jewish, Christian, and FLDS, creating a religious slavery that already may exceed the African-American slave trade. Senator Harry Reid declared polygamy to be a form of organized crime on July 24, 2008. You cannot change what you refuse to acknowledge. Religious slavery in the form of polygamy, inside and outside of religion, is expanding in this country like an epidemic. How long will it be before your children or grandchildren say, I was born a slave in the United States of America?